The incident report from January 18th came back to my desk 6 days later with a classification code none of us had ever seen before. The line where you normally get weather, wildlife, equipment failure, visitor contact, or unauthorized aircraft said polar transmission event, source unresolved, treat as valid traffic. I know exactly when that code first existed because I was the one who called regional comms to ask if one of their database people had fat fingered it into the system. They told me the code was created at 3:14 that morning in response to my report. The problem is my report was filed at 16:52 the same day. I need to explain the kind of work I was doing because if you don't understand the routine, the rest of this just sounds like a radio ghost story, and that isn't what happened. I was a field ranger for a federal coastal reserve on the Beaufort side, north of the last all-season road, attached to a winter operations team that kept a chain of emergency shelters, fuel drums, and route markers serviceable for researchers, medevac crews, and the handful of legal traverses that still happened over stable sea ice. We weren't park interpreters. We were the people who checked whether the ice road flags were still standing after a blow, whether a repeater box had iced over, whether the shelter stovepipe was intact, whether the coordinates in the public safety packets still matched what existed on the ground that week. When I say transmission, I don't mean I heard a creepy voice in static and decided to build a religion around it. I mean, we logged a repeatable signal on an assigned emergency band during a temperature inversion with auroral activity overhead, recorded it on two different handhelds and a fixed base unit, and got four separate human interpretations of its content that should not have been able to coexist. The audio files we captured were mostly broadband hiss with a pulse under it at roughly human cadence. The words were heard live, not recovered later, and the people who heard them weren't suggestible tourists. They were me, Lena Ortiz from Field Logistics, Nancy Willett on base dispatch, and Wade Barlow in the contract helicopter out over the coast. We all heard structured traffic. We did not hear the same traffic. I had been on that coast 11 winters by then. Not continuously, because nobody sensible does that kind of duty year round, but enough seasons that I knew how the light worked in late January, how fast a lead could open under wind stress, how your shoulders feel after 6 hours on a Scandic, even with a good seat pad, how long it took the coffee in a steel bottle to go from drinkable to syrup thick if you left it in the sled box. I was 38, broad through the chest, the way people get after years of hauling jerry cans and survival boxes instead of going to a gym, and I had the kind of patience you either develop in polar field work or get driven out by. My right knee clicked on cold mornings from an old sled rollover outside Kotzebue. I preferred mukluks over hard boots when the route was mostly machine travel. I kept my maps in a waterproof clipboard sleeve that had been repaired with green, tenacious tape 3 different times. That week, I was covering a maintenance rotation that should have belonged to Daryl Boone, our senior winter mechanic, except Daryl had a detached retina and had been medevaced south 2 days earlier. So the schedule came to me, which meant 2 consecutive days running the shelter chain east of Tuktu Base, checking the fuel cache at marker 12, swapping batteries in the weather repeater at Shelter C, and verifying the bamboo route line where the sea ice doglegged around a pressure-ridge field the pilots called the teeth. Routine work. cold, tedious, occasionally pretty in the way that makes you forget your face hurts. The reserve itself was a strip of coast and marine ice, not mountains or timber. People who haven't worked the Arctic think all wilderness dread comes from trees and shadows. Out there, you get the opposite problem. You can see too far when the air is clean. The horizon looks close enough to walk to, and nothing between you and it gives scale except the occasional drum, flag, or dark seam where the ice has opened and refrozen. Snow machines sound different over salt ice than over shore fast drift. There's a harder note under the track noise, and when the surface is wind-planed smooth, your machine feels like it's skimming instead of biting. You smell almost nothing most days except exhaust, metal, your own gloves, and sometimes the sharp, dry scent of sea ice when a fresh crack opens. I was in the vehicle bay at 6:20 the morning it started, warming spare batteries inside my parka and trying to get the zipper on a radio chest harness unstuck with a Leatherman. Lena came in carrying a crate of lithium packs and said, "You taking the old yellow Garmin or the Montana?" "Montana," I said. "Yellow one drifts when it gets stupid cold." "It's already stupid cold." "Then I'm drifting with better screen resolution." That was the level of drama in the room at the start. She rolled her eyes, handed me the battery crate, and went to sign out the PLB and med kit. Lena had 6 winters in logistics and moved like someone who knew exactly how many extra motions cost you in gloves. Shorter than me, black braid tucked into a balaclava, always 2 steps ahead on paperwork. If the base still functioned during storm weeks, half of that was Lena. Nancy was on dispatch by then. She had one of those radio voices that never rose, even when she was irritated. "Field 2, copy your departure target." I keyed up while I was still strapping down the fuel can in the sled. "Field 2 departing for East Shelter Chain, full route to Marker 12, weather repeater swap at sea. Expected return 1600 if the teeth stay honest." "Copy all, Field 2. Marking you on East Line through 9. That last part was normal enough on the surface. She kept a grease map on the wall and tracked active teams by segment, but my route that morning didn't touch Marker 9. The East Line through 9 had been buried and abandoned after a shove event the previous season. We used the inland bypass now, which she knew because she'd updated the board herself 3 days before. I opened the mic again. "Negative, Nancy. We're bypassing 9, using inland around the old line." There was half a second of carrier hiss, then, "Copy, marking inland around old line." Lena looked over from the loading bench because she'd heard it too. "Not alarming. Dispatch mixes things up. People speak before the thought has caught up." But it registered. That was the first thing on the page in my notebook that day, written in pencil because pens fail out there. 0627. Nancy referenced 9 before advised. We left at 7:03 in flat blue light, with the reserve buildings shrinking behind us into low shapes rhymed white. I ran the lead machine, and Lena followed with the cargo sled. Both of us had VHF handhelds chest mounted. Both machines had vehicle radios, and we each carried an inReach for redundancy. Temperature was minus 34 at departure, wind about 8 knots off the northeast, enough to move surface crystals, but not enough to build trouble. The inland bypass ran first over low drifts tucked against the gravel spit, then out across hard pan where the sea ice had frozen level and the route flag showed as orange ticks against all that white. Work in that country settles into a body rhythm fast, throttle pressure, stand over rough patches, sit when the surface lets you, scan the next marker, glance at the GPS, check the sky, listen to the machine. The miles pass in pieces instead of distance. By marker 3, my nose had started that numb then burning cycle that means your face mask's leaking somewhere. By marker 4, Lena pulled alongside and pointed at my sled lash because one strap had started walking loose. We killed the engines, and the quiet came down around us so fast I could hear ice ticking under the snow, little dry sounds like someone tapping a bowl with a fingernail. She tightened the strap and said, "You hear that? The ice? No, nothing." She was right. No ravens over the dump berm behind us anymore. No fox yips from the shoreline. Not even wind combing over the sastrugi. Just the cooling clicks of the engines and a long emptiness that made the flat world feel even flatter. "It'll come back," I said. "Yeah." We got moving again because standing still at that temperature is how you get sentimental about indoor jobs. The sun never really cleared the horizon that time of year. It just bled a copper band under the cloud deck to the south and left everything else in blue-gray. At 0841, just west of Shelter B, I did the routine radio check. "Took 2 dispatch. This is Field 2 at B approach. Radio check. Over." Nancy came back clear. "Dispatch copies you 5 by 5. Report shelter condition." Shelter B intact from exterior. Stovepipe visible. No drift over door. Proceeding. That should have been the whole exchange. Instead, a second carrier opened on the same frequency before I unkeyed. Not stronger than Nancy, not weaker either. Not static exactly. It sounded like when two transmissions overlap so precisely, they stop being two voices and become one ugly chewing sound. Then, inside it, clipped and flat, I heard, "Red drum's not safe. Take the inland line. Do not mark 9." I let go of the button and stared at Lena. She had her head tilted, one glove pressed against the earpiece inside her hood. Nancy said, "Field 2. Repeat last." I hadn't said anything. "Dispatch. Say again," I answered. There was a pause. "I thought you transmitted." "Copy if negative." "Negative. Unidentified traffic stepped on the channel. Did you hear that?" Another pause. A little longer. "Stand by." Lena pulled her machine close enough that we could talk without yelling. "You heard drums?" I said. "You heard that too?" "No." "I got cache 8 and stay off the shoreline." At that moment, if I'd been a different kind of person, I might have decided the cold was getting to us and turned around. But fieldwork trains you in layers before it trains you in fear. Mishearings happen. Ice scatters radio weird. Temperature inversions bend signals. We were in a zone with aviation traffic, marine emergency bands, and enough metal in the repeater hardware to make a mess on a bad day. So I logged the time, checked battery status, and waited for dispatch. Nancy came back after maybe 40 seconds. "Field 2, base unit received open carrier with modulation, no clear voice content. Wade Barlow also reported interference on approach corridor. Continue mission unless traffic repeats. Note time and context." "Copy." Then she added, "And stay off the shoreline." I looked at Lena again. We hadn't said anything yet about the shoreline. That one went in the notebook too. Shelter B was a fiberglass emergency hut on skids, anchored by ice screws and guy line dead men, painted international orange badly enough that every few years somebody had to sand and touch it up where the wind stripped it. The door opened stiff, but the inside was fine. Dry stove, intact med box seal, fuel inventory, short by 1 quart from the previous log, probably from priming. I swapped the shelter radio battery, checked the flare case, and wrote the inspection in the clipboard binder hanging by the bunk. Standard. Lena tested the propane heater and cursed when the regulator stuck. Inside a shelter, after machine noise and cold, your body notices itself again. My shoulders were hot under the parka from the ride. My fingers stung as circulation came back. There was that layered smell every remote hut has if it's been used by competent people. Old white gas, damp wool that dried weeks ago, a little plywood, a little ash. Lena handed me the shelter log so I could sign. The last entry before ours was from 12 days earlier. Daryl and a volunteer EMT named Kessler. Shelter condition good, drift moderate. Stove drawing poorly due to crosswind. All normal. I would have forgotten that page entirely if not for the line beneath Daryl's signature where someone had written, in block capitals, no name attached. If the channel repeats, leave the flags as found. I asked Lena if she'd seen it. She took the binder, read the line, and frowned. That wasn't there on inventory. You sure? I prepped these logs. I'd remember that. Daryl messing with you? He doesn't print. The letters were done with a felt tip marker, pressed hard enough to score the paper. Not old either. Ink still had that slight sheen permanent marker keeps before it fully dulls. The problem wasn't that it was spooky. The problem was access. Nobody should have been in that hut since Daryl, and Daryl wouldn't have written that sentence in anonymous block print. I photographed the page with the base issued camera, date stamp on, then checked the door latch and snow seal outside. No sign of recent entry, no loose drift pattern, no boot cuts except ours. Out there, wind erases a lot, but not instantly, and not when the weather had been this stable. We had a decision point at B, continue east, or abort and bring the oddities home to base. If it had just been the radio hit, I'd have kept going without another thought. If it had just been the shelter note, I'd have bagged the page and kept going. Together, plus Nancy's shoreline comment, it justified at least a conversation. I called in. Dispatch, Field 2. Need to log an unauthorized note in Shelter B register, plus repeat unknown traffic and possible information crossover. Advise. Nancy answered immediately, which was unusual because base mornings get busy. Read the note. I did. She didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. Then, copy. Continue to see if conditions support. Photograph all route flags between B and C. Do not remove any markers unless they create an immediate hazard. That response wasn't wrong. It was just specific in a way that suggested she'd been waiting for a different version of the same call. Lena heard it too. When I unkeyed, she said, "Why route flags?" No idea. Because of the note? Maybe. We ate standing up in the lee of the hut, frozen energy bars and coffee from bottles we'd kept inside our parkas. My coffee tasted like stainless steel and burned sugar because I'd overdone the grounds that morning. The sky had gone clearer to the north, thin green wash starting above the horizon, though it was still technically day. Aurora, that early usually meant radio clutter later. Lena sat on the sled tongue and flexed her left hand out of the glove because she jammed a knuckle on the regulator. For 5 minutes, it felt almost ordinary again. Machines idling low, warm bottle against my chest. my breath frosting the fur ruff and falling back in little crystals. Then Wade came up on the aviation relay. Field 2, you boys seen the line at 7? He called everybody boys if he was in a hurry, Lena included. Contract pilot, former guard, flew like he trusted his machine but not the people who scheduled it. I keyed back. Negative on 7. We're at B heading east. What line? There was a burst of static and his voice thinned. Looks like fresh bamboo south of the old shoreline. Maybe half-mile. Runs straight out into bad ice. You folks put that in. I said we did not. Nancy cut in before he could elaborate. Wade, stay off that sector. Maintain your western sweep. Didn't plan on landing on it, he said. Just never seen a route line walk like that. Route line walk. That was his phrase. Not a technical one, but it fit. Bamboo flags don't migrate unless somebody moves them or the ice carrying them calves away and drifts. On shore-fast ice under those conditions, either explanation was bad. Between B and C, the terrain changed from flat white to a low pressure ridge field where slabs had ridden up months earlier and frozen in place like the backs of buried animals. The route snaked inland around it. I slowed to take photos of every flag per Nancy's instruction. Orange fiberglass poles, black tape bands, numbers in grease pencil, all where I expected until flag B11. That one had a second pole lashed to it with blue survey tape, newer than our markers and not ours by material or not. 10 yards beyond it, there was another blue tape pole, then another. They led south, away from our maintained line, out toward the old shoreline route Nancy had referenced at departure. Lena dismounted and stood by the first one, gloved fingers on the tape. Fresh, she said. This hasn't been out here long. The tape snapped in the windless cold when I bent it. Not brittle with age. Recently tied. I scanned the snow for machine tracks, boot prints, anything. There was nothing except our twin machine lines and the shallow wind texture over older crust. Photograph and leave, I said. We did. The blue tape poles were spaced too evenly for random debris, not evenly enough for survey work. More like whoever placed them had been walking and counting under bad conditions. 20 paces plant, 20 paces plant. They vanished into a low shimmer where the air above the ice thickened and bent the distance. Not fog, just cold air stacked wrong. At 10:17, the transmission returned. This time it came while I was crouched, writing waypoint notes on the GPS. The carrier opened so hard it blanked Nancy's voice mid-sentence, a dry pulse under the hiss, 3 beats, then language cut into pieces. I heard, very distinctly, Marker 12 is already used. Maintain visual on Ortiz. Do not answer from the ridge. I had not transmitted Lena's surname on the air all day. Lena ripped one glove halfway off so she could get a finger under her earpiece. It said fuel, not 12. It said the fuel's already there. Nancy came back with clipped force. All field units, hold traffic. Unknown modulation on emergency band. Field 2, report content separately. Separately meant not over the radio. We switched to text on the inReach because digital messages, while slower, don't cross-contaminate in the same way. I typed what I'd heard. Lena typed hers on her own unit. When the replies came back through base 12 minutes later, Nancy sent only, continue to see do not acknowledge unknown traffic, regional comms patching. It was around then that the day stopped feeling like a maintenance run and started feeling like work under observation, and I'm aware of how that sentence sounds. I'm not saying something watched us in a theatrical sense. I mean, the operational environment began answering conditions we had not yet created. We would consider a route choice, and the radio would react. We would identify a task, and some fragment of it would appear in the next burst. By itself, any one of those could be coincidence. In sequence, over a polar workday where every choice is recorded in time and place, coincidence starts losing ground. Shelter C sat 32 miles from base on an elevated pan of old sea ice that had locked to the coast early in the season. It was our farthest easy access shelter before you got into territory requiring more deliberate risk assessments. The hut was there. The weather repeater box was not where it should have been. Not missing. Moved. The mount post still stood beside the hut, 4 bolt holes empty. The repeater box lay 15 feet away in a drift, upright as if someone had set it down carefully after removing it. The cable hadn't torn. It had been unplugged at the junction and coiled. Lena made a hard little sound in her throat. No? No, covered the practical part. You don't hand carry a metal repeater box in that cold unless you have a reason. The thing weighed nearly 40 pounds with battery and casing, and if you were going to service it, you'd do it at the post where the antenna line was already mounted. I walked the perimeter. No prints, no sled marks, no animal trace, just the box, the empty post, and one line in the snow where the coax had dragged. Inside C, the air was colder than it should have been because the vent flap had been left cracked. On the shelf above the bunk were 3 paper cups from our own supply stock, not in the inventory package, set mouth down in a neat row. Beside them lay a fresh route sketch done on the back of a fuel manifest. Blue pen, inland bypass, old shoreline, pressure ridge field, shelter C represented by a square. A line from sea out southeast across unmaintained ice to a circle marked simply TX. I knew that manifest form number, FR-12B, fuel transfer and variance sheet. We kept them in a folder at base, not in shelters. Lena stood with the sketch in both hands for a second and said, "This is from our office." Could Darrell have left it? Not in blue pen. He writes like he's cutting wood. Anyone from regional? They don't come out here and doodle maps. I radioed base from inside the hut because the wind had picked up enough outside to hiss across the mic. Dispatch, Field 2 at C repeater unit, physically displaced from mount. Shelter interior contains unauthorized materials, including route sketch on FR-12B manifest. Need confirmation of any maintenance personnel in sector past 12 days. Nancy's reply took long enough that I pictured her with a hand over the mic, talking to someone else in the room. Negative confirmed personnel. Regional comms requests you preserve all found materials. Wade is diverting toward your vicinity for visual if weather permits. Then, before I could answer, a voice stepped into the carrier, calm as if joining an active conversation. Do not use Wade for the second leg. He doesn't have enough fuel to hold. Same cadence as before. Same flatness. Not Nancy. Not Wade. The ugly part wasn't that it knew Wade's fuel state. Pilots discuss fuel. The ugly part was that he was low because he deviated north for a survey circle Nancy had assigned him 7 minutes earlier on a different channel patch. Lena and I should not have known that yet, and neither should anything riding our local line. Nancy swore. It was the only time I ever heard her do it on official traffic. After that, the day narrowed. We were no longer casually curious. We were documenting under stress. Lena bagged the map and the anonymous shelter note in evidence sleeves from the med kit. I remounted the repeater box, but left it powered down per base instruction. Regional wanted the chain quiet except for essential traffic. We took still photos, compass bearings, a quick thermal scan of the surrounding drift field in case a body or machine had been buried nearby. The thermal showed one strange thing. 30 yards southeast of the hut, under about 18 inches of wind slab, a long, narrow heat signature too shallow and even to be geology. We dug. What we found was a sealed transit case, military green under the rime, no current reserve markings on it. The latches were stiff but not rusted. Inside was a coiled antenna cable, a handset with no battery, and a laminated card carrying emergency voice procedure codes from 3 different services: Coast Guard, Forestry, Civil Air Search. Not old enough to be Cold War surplus, not new enough to be ours. The card's corner was stamped with a support unit acronym nobody on our team recognized. That was our visual evidence and our physical evidence in one place, and still no sign of who had buried it. By then, the light had flattened into that early afternoon Arctic gray where every contour looks rubbed out. We should have made the obvious safety call and stayed the night at sea, but Base wanted one more thing before they locked us down: verify whether the blue tape line from B connected to anything visible near C. That was reasonable. If somebody had staged unauthorized equipment out on the ice, we needed to know if there was a cache, a downed machine, or a public safety issue. It was also only supposed to be a quick walkout under machine support, a mile at most. We left the sled at sea, marked the hut as occupied, and took one snow machine light, a throw bag, probe poles, radios, and the handheld GPS. That short traverse is the cleanest section in my memory because stress sharpens root details. We moved southeast on foot along scattered blue tape poles that emerged from the drift as we went. Snow over old sea ice feels different from snow over land. There's a hollowness through the boot when the crust bridges little voids. Every 10 yards I checked the probe depth and listened. Lena kept visual on the hut light behind us. The ridge field ahead threw up low blue shadows. No wind at ground level, though the sky above had that fast translucent movement that tells you higher air is working hard. At the 6th blue pole, we found a red drum. Standard aviation fuel drum, half buried on its side, cap intact, stenciling sanded blank. There are plenty of red drums in the north. Fuel is how the north works. But this one had a fresh smear of yellow paint across the top in the exact pattern our base uses to mark condemned stock. I crouched to check the bung seal. Untouched. Lena stood still long enough that I looked back. "What?" I asked. "That's not what I heard." "What did you hear?" "Not safe." It said the red drums were not safe. Plural. We scanned outward and found 2 more, spaced in a loose arc under the snow. None were on any cache inventory. None showed on my GPS layers. All 3 had the same yellow slash. Not random debris. Deliberate placement. I reported it in a short burst. Nancy acknowledged and said, "Return to see aviation down. White out over the coast." That was another surface normal sentence with a bad edge under it. Aviation down could mean Wade had landed due weather. It could also mean he'd lost his window and gone back west. I asked which. Nancy said only, "He's no longer airborne. Return to sea and hold." We were turning back when the transmission came on so strong it kicked both our handhelds into feedback. No hiss this time. Just a steady, dry scrape with words inside it, each syllable clear enough that I can still hear the shape of them. I heard, not the drums, the men who moved them, Marker 12 is already used. Field 2, leave Ortiz at the circle and return with line, Lena said at the same moment. It says the circle is the only safe place. Neither of us moved for maybe 2 seconds. The horizon around us was clean. No people, no machines, no aircraft, only the red drums, the blue tape poles, and the shape of Shelter C behind us like a child's drawing. I grabbed her sleeve. Back. She didn't argue. We moved fast, walking, not running, because running on sea ice is how you punch through a crust you didn't test. Halfway back, I heard something underfoot that I had not heard all day. A low, carrying groan from the ice south of us. Not a crack, but pressure traveling. The kind of sound that makes every experienced person start calculating distances without conscious thought. At sea, we sealed up, put the stove on, and turned the powered radios off one by one to see whether the carrier would persist. With all the VHF units dead, the hut quieted. The silence was such a relief it made me lightheaded. Wade checked in by sat phone at 1403, routed through Nancy, and put on speaker because Base wanted everyone to hear the same information at once. His voice sounded thin and angry. I put down west of 7 in a ground blow. I'm fine. Machine's fine. But I crossed your little bamboo line on the way in, and my panel lit up like I'd hit a transmitter. Not a beacon. More like every frequency wanted priority at once. Can you visually confirm the line origin? I asked. Negative. Visibility went to hell. And listen, one more thing. I heard traffic on guard that matched your dispatch cadence, but it was calling sectors by old names, sectors from the military charts, not current civilian grid. Nancy said, I have never used military charts. I know that, Wade said. That's why I'm telling you. That phone call mattered later because it established the testimony piece. 4 listeners, 4 professional frames, 4 different interpretations, sharing operational detail they should not have shared. No one on that call was performing. We were all trying to reduce an unknown to a safe category before dark. Base wanted us to shelter in place until they could get weather and comms under control. That made sense. Out in polar country, the right choice is often the dull one. So for about an hour, we lived normal hut life. Lena melted snow. I logged observations on paper because paper doesn't care about batteries. We inventoried the hut, checked stove draft, rewrapped a frayed guy line, ate instant noodles that tasted mostly of salt and aluminum, and listened to the faint pop of frost building on the inside of the window frame. There's a human decompression that happens after adrenaline if the environment allows it. Your hands shake a little, you get suddenly hungry, you start talking about practical nonsense because your mind wants handles. Lena looked at the evidence bags on the shelf and said, if this ends up being Daryl, I'm quitting. You're not quitting over Daryl and a marker pen. I'll quit over his handwriting alone. He prints like a felony letter. That got a laugh out of her, brief but real. The stove ticked. I wrote the route sketch description in my notebook and noticed my pencil point had snapped without me feeling it. Outside, the light continued draining out of the world until C's orange walls seemed to glow by themselves. At 1526, the hut speaker crackled, even though the VHF remained powered off. Not loud, just enough to draw both our heads around. The shelter unit had its own emergency receive circuit on backup battery, isolated from the handhelds. We had shut that down too. I checked the panel. Dark, no indicator lights, and from the speaker grill by the bunk shelf came the dry scrape again, followed by three clipped tones, each one pitched just a little lower than the last. Then a voice that was almost mine, not my timbre, not theatrical mimicry, more like the channel had learned the shape of how I issued route decisions and poured other content into it. Field 2, confirm you are inside C. Confirm Ortiz is inside C. Confirm you have recovered the relay case. Lena didn't look at me. She was staring at the speaker grill like it might produce a person. I said nothing. The voice continued, using my cadence again. If unconfirmed, proceed to circle. If confirmed, proceed to line. One responder required. That was the first moment the situation presented an action cost in plain language. Up to then, we had anomalies, evidence, and bad communications. Now something within the system was trying to split us. I took the shelter speaker wire loose with pliers. The sound stopped mid-word. No drama, just cut clean. We left the wire on the table. The decision after that was whether to stay radio dark and ride out the night, or move while we still had some ambient light and surface visibility. Base wanted us held. The transmission wanted motion. Wade, still weathered and west of 7, argued by sat phone that the ridge field south of C was known bad under inversion conditions and would only worsen after dark. Lena wanted to stay put. I leaned that way too, until Nancy said one sentence that changed the equation. Field 2, we're seeing your route on the board extend past C. We did not have live GPS tracking tied into a base board, not in that reserve. Our devices logged locally unless we manually exported or sent a digital breadcrumb. The only board at dispatch was grease pencil and magnets. I asked what she meant. Her answer was careful, as if she knew the words themselves mattered now. The mileage notation associated with your outbound segment is increasing at a rate inconsistent with your stationary status. Regional Comms advises you may be on an active reflection path. They recommend relocation inland to break the geometry. That is not language Nancy used. That is language fed through someone else into a dispatcher who hated jargon. But the substance made operational sense. If the transmission depended on line of sight over flat ice, moving inland around the ridge mass might reduce it. It was the first explanation of the day that felt like it came from professionals rather than the event itself, so we chose to move. Preparation took 15 minutes. Pack the evidence, drain the stove enough to avoid flare-up risk, check machine lines for freeze, strap down the relay case, leave a written note in the hut log with time, direction, and destination in case we got rolled into a standard SAR the next morning. I wrote in block print, maybe because of the anonymous note earlier, maybe because my hands had gone clumsy. 1608, departing C inland due, comms anomaly and base instruction. 2 personnel, heading B, do not trust speaker system. The dark outside wasn't full dark yet. Arctic winter gives you stages. First, the horizon goes colorless. Then distance begins to collapse. Then the sky and the surface turn into 2 similar shades, separated only by where the wind moves. We ran both machines close, Lena on my left rear quarter, so I could keep her headlamp in peripheral view. I switched my GPS to breadcrumb at 5-second intervals, not because I expected navigation trouble on that line, but because by then I wanted as much record as possible. For the first 20 minutes, the move inland worked. The carrier stayed quiet. The machine tracks bit hard on colder snow over landfast pressure zones. We passed our own outbound marks, visible as paired troughs crusting over. The relief of seeing them was disproportionate. Human beings like confirmation more than courage. Then the tracks diverged. My fresh return track, recorded in front of us by our own headlamps, began running one machine width to the right of where our outbound trail should have been. At first, I thought I was misjudging in low light. Then I stopped, got off, and put my boot in the morning track. My boot landed in untouched crust. Our visible outbound trail lay 4 feet north. My GPS screen showed my current position directly atop the breadcrumb line from the morning. I have checked that unit's settings more times than I can count since then. Datum was correct. Logging interval correct. Track display accurate to the morning route. Yet the physical trail and the digital trail had separated. Lena walked between the two lines, headlamp beam low. Which one did we actually take? This morning? The north line? She looked up. Then why does the machine look more worn on the south? I knelt and touched both. She was right. The snow in the southern line, the one we were supposedly creating in real time, had harder glazed edges like a track that had sat in cold for hours. The northern line looked newer. That was the clean break between measurement problem and experiential problem. Up to then, our instruments and records had been suspect. Here, the ground itself refused sequence. We mounted back up and kept moving because field logic doesn't vanish just because the world stops cooperating. Standing in it doesn't improve it. About 10 minutes later, Nancy called, voice tight now, no borrowed jargon. Field 2, respond with your last known marker, I answered. Between C and B inland bypass, approaching B11, she came back immediately. Negative. Your last digital ping places you east of 12. We were nowhere near 12. 12 was farther out on the line than C by several miles, and in a sector I had not visited that day. Lena heard that and keyed in before I could stop her. Dispatch. Verify. We have not been to 12. The transmission hit the instant she acknowledged, cutting over both of us so hard my speaker distorted. Marker 12 is already used. Do not send Ortiz twice. I didn't tell Lena what I'd heard then, because there are moments when information helps and moments when it just spreads panic sideways. I said only, we are going dark, in reach only. Then I shut the vehicle radio off and made her do the same. We navigated by physical line after that, not by voice and not by screen. Follow the inland poles. Confirm the ridge shoulder to our right. Keep the dark hump of Shore Bluff on bearing. Those are old ways of moving, and they still work when electronics get ambitious. The machine headlights turn the blue tape on the unauthorized poles into flashes of white. I realized with a slow drop in my stomach that there were now more of those poles than there had been on the outbound route. Not by one or two, by enough that the false line and the real line braided in and out of each other like someone had been planting markers while we sheltered. At B11, we found another circle. Not painted, not marked with stakes. Just a ring in the snow about 12 feet across where the surface hoar had been cleared away clean to hard glare ice. No footprints in it. No debris. In our headlamps, it looked polished. One of the blue poles stood at its edge. Lena stopped her machine without being told. That's the circle, I said. Stay off it. She didn't answer. She was listening. I could tell by the slight forward angle of her head inside the hood, the way people lean toward sound even in a helmet. Then she said very softly, "It's using my brother's voice now. That is the only part of this account I cannot independently verify because I did not hear her brother." Her brother had died 3 years earlier, working ice roads inland. She had mentioned him exactly once to me in all the time I'd known her. I am including it because it governed the next decision. If I leave it out, my later actions look irrational. I got off the machine, took her handlebars, and killed her engine. "Look at me," I said. She didn't. Her eyes were on the circle. "Ortiz." "Nothing." There are not many times in professional field work when you put hands on a colleague without discussion. This was one. I grabbed her shoulder harness and pulled her backward off the seat. She fought me, not like an attack, more like someone trying to push through a crowd. She said, "He's out there. He's on the second line." That phrase mattered later. Second line? I dragged her 6 feet back by brute leverage, and the transmission came on through my dead radio anyway. Speaker dark, voice flattened to almost pure tone. This time I heard no words at all, just cadence. But my body interpreted it as instruction, not in a mystical way. More like when a shouted command cuts through thinking and your muscles begin the movement before you've agreed to it. My right hand started lifting the tow rope from the sled box before I realized I was doing it. I dropped it and swore at myself out loud, hard enough that the cold air burned my throat. Sometimes profanity is just a way to remind your brain it still belongs to you. The only safe move then was extraction by physical means. No debate, no waiting for Lena to recover it on her own. I clipped her harness to my sled with the short safety tether we used for hauling injured people on foot, got her onto my machine behind me, left her machine idling where it stood because I did not have time to double hitch in that state, and drove west by compass bearing and memory, not speed. She was shaking so hard her helmet knocked my backplate. Twice she tried to tell me something, and the words came out tangled. Once I made out second leg. Once, don't let them count me. Behind us, through the engine noise, I heard the abandoned machine remain running far longer than it should have on cold idle. The return to base took 2 hours and 19 minutes. It should have taken less than 90. That discrepancy is logged, measured, and still unresolved. Part of the excess was caution. I kept the speed down because I had one half-responsive passenger and no working trust in our route markers. Part of it was the weather collapsing along the coast, forcing a wider inland line. Part of it is harder to account for. At 1804, I passed marker 4 twice by my own visual identification. Same bent pole, same black tape half torn free, same snowdrift built like a shoulder on the north side. My notebook records the timestamps on both sightings because I forced myself to stop and write the second one down rather than tell myself fatigue had done it. We reestablished clean voice contact with base only when the buildings came into visual range and their fixed lights gave me a geometry I trusted more than the ice. Nancy met us outside with 2 more staff and a med blanket. Lena was coherent by then, but furious in the way people get after a near miss, when fear has to find a useful shape or it will break you somewhere private. She kept saying, "He used old names. He used my brother's root names." No one asked who he was. That detail tells me the room was already moving toward containment language, even if nobody said it. The debrief started that night and continued for 2 days. Regional comms patched in from Fairbanks. Aviation filed their own anomaly report off Wade's panel spike. Every device was bagged, tagged, and duplicated. I gave a statement in the conference room with my mitts still on because my hands wouldn't warm. Lena gave hers separately. Nancy turned over the base audio. Wade overnighted his cockpit recorder segment. Here is where this story departs from the others people assume when they hear pieces of it. There was no old timer at Regional who leaned back and said, finally, "You found the thing we've always managed." There was no secret file slid across the table. The institution did not reveal hidden mastery because it didn't have any. What it had was procedure trying to grow around a problem faster than understanding could. That is its own kind of bad. Regional comms could not classify the signal as voice, digital burst, interference, atmospheric bounce, or malicious intrusion. The waveform contained speech-like segmentation without stable phonemes. The recordings did carry a repeating underpattern, but when they ran it against weather, radar, military, marine, and aviation libraries, nothing matched. Each live listener reported different lexical content, yet the timing of the heard phrases aligned across testimony as if we'd all been listening to the same slots filled by different words. The first reversal came from the GPS exports. My Montana showed my physical route to sea and back with the expected shelter stops, plus one additional segment beginning at 1541, while Lena and I were still inside sea, extending southeast from the hut to a coordinate near marker 12, and then terminating. Total length of the Phantom segment, 4.8 miles. Average speed over ground, 2.9 miles per hour, consistent with a single snow machine under moderate load. That would have been strange enough. It got worse when they pulled Lena's unit. Her Phantom segment covered the same ground, but started at 1543 and terminated not at 12, but at the circle near B11, where I had pulled her off the line. Average speed, walking pace. Neither of us had carried the units on those routes. The timestamps overlapped with our sat phone call to Wade, which was independently logged through base. In simple terms, our devices recorded excursions we did not make while we were on speakerphone in another location. Regional's first theory was cross-device artifact from the repeater box we'd found. That held for about 4 hours until they discovered the same Phantom segment in base metadata associated with the grease board notation Nancy had mentioned. Not a live GPS board, like I said, just a digital timestamp layer in the dispatch software tracking manually entered route states. The software had generated an auto status change at 1542, reading, field, 2-second leg, active. There was no command in the system to create that phrase. That wording is why Lena said second line in the conference room when comms briefed us. She went pale before the technician finished the sentence. I asked if anyone else in prior seasons had reported similar interference. They said not exactly. There had been scattered records of route anomalies during inversion weeks, mostly dismissed as propagation and operator error. A pilot in 2018 reported hearing decommissioned military sector names on a civil frequency. A biologist in 2021 logged a shelter speaker activation after battery removal. A mechanic, Daryl, as it turned out, had written a note in a maintenance email that read, "If the channel starts assigning you, don't answer like it's dispatch." Nobody had connected those incidents because each one, alone, fit inside the normal tolerance of northern field weirdness. That was the second reversal, not institutional concealment. Administrative near miss. Enough fragments to form a pattern if anyone had been tasked to look, but no single office owned the whole pattern, so the pattern behaved like bad weather in the paperwork. Everybody noted it, nobody named it. My report was what forced naming. The next 24 hours became about reconstruction. We laid maps on the table. We compared the phrases each of us had heard. A linguist from regional called in because nobody knew what department else to use, pointed out that the signal wasn't behaving like language aimed at a listener. It behaved like constrained tasking resolving through the listener's own professional vocabulary. That meant Nancy heard sector references and route status. Wade heard fuel and flight hold. Lena heard cache and family route language. I heard marker instructions and personnel control. Same cadence, same timing slots, different semantic skin. Then it's not communicating, I said. The linguist looked tired already. I didn't say that. I said it may not be choosing words the way human speech does. Nobody in the room liked that answer. Lena was removed from the incident by medical after she failed a simple orientation test and wrote her brother's old ice road call sign in the date field 3 times. She wasn't unstable. She was furious and lucid in every way, except around radio traffic. Every time a handset opened anywhere near her, she flinched as if someone had touched a burn. That was her cost. She transferred south by spring. I haven't seen her since, though I did get one email the next year saying only, I still don't use speakerphone. My part got worse on day 2. Up to then, I had been the most functional witness. Good notes, clear sequence. No confusion except understandable fatigue. Then Regional Tech played back a cleaned up composite of the various recordings through studio headphones and asked me to mark where I believed my heard phrases began. I told them that was pointless because the words weren't actually in the file. They said they knew, they wanted perceptual timing only. So I listened. 3 pulses, dry scrape, a silence inside the noise that seemed to lean forward, and I heard myself from some point ahead of the original event saying, Field 2, departing C on second leg, 1 responder, line is active. I have never said those words on any recording or in any field report. They exist only in the composite file and in the dispatch software status entry generated at 1542. The room went very still when I repeated what I'd heard, because the technician nearest the speaker closed his eyes and said, That's almost exactly what I got too. He had not been present on the ice. That is when the classification problem stopped being about source and started being about spread. If the signal only existed in the field, you build a field protocol. If it could instantiate through analysis, through attempted classification itself, you had a different category of operational risk. Comms shut the room down, logged the time, and changed the handling instructions. No open speaker, playback, no monitoring without 2-person observation, no single listener review. They were improvising, but they were doing it honestly. I was placed on indoor duty pending review. That should have been the end of my direct contact with it. Instead, the event followed me one layer deeper into the record. I took my field notebook home that night because I didn't trust leaving the only handwritten sequence in the office. At 22:11, sitting at my kitchen table with reheated stew going cold in front of me, I turned to the page where I'd logged the second sighting of marker 4. Under that entry, in the same pencil, same pressure, Same all capital block print I use when my gloves are on. There was a line I had not written in the field. Do not confirm second leg from inside. I examined the indentation, the graphite shine, the facing page transfer. It had been written with my pencil in my notebook. No dramatic flourish. No difference in hand that would let me dismiss it as obvious tampering. Just one instruction, phrased in the same operational tone the transmission had used all day. I went back to base with the notebook immediately. Nancy was still on late duty. She looked at the line and did the small, exhausted exhale of a person who has used up her supply of ordinary explanations. Did you write it at debrief? She asked. No. Do you remember thinking it? Yes. That was true, and I wish it weren't. I had thought it around 1600 in Shelter C, right after the speaker used my cadence. I had not written it then, yet there it was in the same place I would have written it if I had. That was the personal absorption phase, if you need a term. My records and my unrecorded decisions had begun to overlap. Not full memory loss, nothing so dramatic. Worse, in a way, small procedural leakage, a route not taken, preserved as if taken, an instruction not written, preserved as writing. If you work a job that depends on trust and sequence, what happened, then what happened next, that kind of damage cuts deeper than fear. The review board grounded all East Line winter traffic for 9 days. They did not call it a haunting or an unexplained phenomenon or any of the words people from outside would reach for. They called it a temporary communications hazard with unresolved propagation risk. That language sounds evasive until you have to send real people back into real weather. Then you understand why institutions use sterile terms. Sterile terms let you act before meaning arrives. They flew a specialist team in with shielded recorders, spectrum analyzers, and enough caution to insult everybody already stationed there. I was not on the field deployment, which bothered me more than it should have. Professional pride is ugly. You spend years learning a place, then one event strips you from your own terrain and hands it to outsiders with better equipment. I sat in the operations room and watched their check-ins come through text. Clean insertion, no voice anomalies first 6 hours. Recovered one unauthorized red drum at the prior coordinate. Blue poles reduced in count versus photo log. Circle not located, reduced in count. Not absent, reduced. On the second day, the specialist team reached marker 12. There was supposed to be nothing there but a weathered navigation post and an emergency drum rack. What they found, according to their written report, was one of our old reserve sleds half buried and iced into place, serial number matching a unit retired 3 winters earlier after an engine fire. In the sled box were 6 bamboo root poles wrapped with blue tape, one dead handheld radio of a model we had never issued at Tuktu Base, and a carbon copy field movement sheet with my call sign written in the departure block above the words second leg. The sheet was dated January 18th at 1539. Carbon copy forms don't materialize from radio interference. Somebody had to print that form or carry it in from somewhere else. That physical artifact is the one point in the case that still argues hardest for human involvement, and I can't disprove it. Maybe there was a person or group moving through our route infrastructure. Maybe the transmission and the artifacts were separate problems that intersected. Maybe that's the ambiguity the whole incident hangs on. But no prints were recovered, no camp, no machine evidence, except the retired sled frozen in place where it had no practical reason to be. The specialist team bagged the form and the radio and brought them back. The radio's internal clock, on recovered battery, displayed 1542 and would not advance. Three more things happened before I left the reserve. First, Wade's cockpit recorder was processed. During the time he believed he was flying west of 7 in Weatherhold, the magnetic heading and fuel state data in the aircraft systems aligned with his account. But the cabin audio captured him speaking aloud to someone named Mercer and receiving a response. "I am Mercer. I was in Shelter C at that time." The response on the recording is not my voice. It uses my call sign anyway. Second, Nancy admitted that the morning departure error about marker 9 had not been a mistake. She had opened the route board at 6:27 and seen the magnet already sitting on East Line through 9 before I called in. She corrected herself after I challenged it, but did not report that detail immediately because, in her words, she was trying not to start a weird day by making it weirder. I understand that choice. I also think about how much later unfolded because we all kept trimming the event down to manageable size. Third, I reviewed the shelter logs from B and C again under controlled conditions and found that the anonymous note in B, "If the channel repeats, leave the flags as found," had transferred graphite pressure from a missing prior page. It had not been written directly on the page we bagged. The sheet above it, the one that should have carried the original writing, was gone from the binder cleanly at the perforation. Whoever removed it knew exactly what they wanted to keep and what to leave. That is the closest thing I have to evidence of a predecessor without becoming another predecessor mystery. Someone before us recognized the pattern enough to write guidance, then removed the full context. Maybe Daryl, maybe somebody earlier, maybe nobody local at all. The partial instruction was all that remained. Leave the flags as found. In other words, don't improve the route the channel is building. I was formally reassigned in March, not fired, not silenced, not leaned on with any secret paperwork. The official reason was operational stress after a communications incident. That was accurate. The unofficial reality was simpler. I no longer trusted open band traffic in the field, and a ranger who second guesses emergency transmissions is a liability. The reserve offered me summer duty on inland visitor compliance. I declined. I took a county emergency management job farther south, where the roads stay attached to the ground and radios mostly say what they mean. People always ask whether the agency knew more than it told us in the end. My answer is no, not in the satisfying way people want. They knew enough to create a classification, enough to change handling procedure, enough to close the east line under certain atmospheric conditions, and enough to stop pretending every report was random. They did not know the source. They did not know whether the signal used existing records to construct routes or constructed records to justify routes. They did not know what second leg meant except operationally, which was enough to keep people away from circles and unauthorized flags when the channel opened. As for what it cost me, the clean answer is work. The less clean answer is sequence. Before that winter, if you had asked me what gave me confidence in the field, I would have said training, observation, and written records. Now I think written records are only as trustworthy as the conditions under which they remain singular. That sounds abstract until you're the one comparing your own notebook to your own memory and finding a third version between them. To this day, I write with a different style of mechanical pencil because ordinary carpenter pencils make my stomach tighten. I also don't use live speaker audio if I can avoid it. Earbud or headset, one ear at a time. People joke about it in the office. I let them. Once you've heard your own cadence carrying an instruction you did not issue, you get particular about where sound sits in your head. There is one last field detail I should include because it complicates the whole thing in a way I still haven't resolved. During the specialist team recovery at Marker 12, they measured the bamboo poles found in the iced-in sled box. 6 poles. One of them had a black tape band and grease pencil notation reading B11, exactly matching our reserve route convention, except the handwriting on the number was mine. Not similar to mine. Mine. I was shown the photo during exit briefing. I had never handled that pole before, and yet the numeral 11 had the same hooked second stroke I use when my hand is cold. I asked whether they'd taken prints. They had, but cold weather handling wasn't clean enough for anything useful. I asked whether the pole might have come from our own line and been relabeled later. They said possible, but the weathering pattern suggested the number had been written before extended exposure, not after. I asked no more questions because there's a point in every incident where additional detail stops helping the person who has to live with it. Present day, I am 3 states south of that coast. I work in a county office that worries about floodplain maps, siren maintenance, and the kind of storms that come with leaves on the trees. There is comfort in problems that move according to roads and rivers. I still keep cold weather gloves in my truck out of habit. I still wake sometimes at 3 o'clock expecting to hear track noise cooling outside a hut. For 2 years after the incident, nothing happened that I couldn't place inside ordinary life. Then last month, a records request I had filed back when I left service finally came through. I wanted the cleaned reports for my own file. Most of the packet was what I'd already seen: witness statements, equipment analysis, closure memos, rote suspension dates. The cover letter was newer. It listed my incident under the classification code created that January morning, the one I told you about at the start. Below the code was a cross-reference field I had never seen before. Associated responders: Willett, Barlow, Ortiz, Mercer, Mercer. 2 entries for me. I called the number on the letter and got a records clerk in Anchorage who sounded tired and overworked. I asked if the duplicate name was a typo. She said,